His exact words were, "Your role is no longer essential," delivered with the kind of calm arrogance men like Evan wear like cologne. I sat across from him, hands steady, watching a man who had no idea what he'd just broken, or what was about to break him. People in the comments always ask what it feels like in that moment. For me, it was the silence right before a storm decides where to strike, because even then I still held something he didn't know existed. Yet, if you've ever been blindsided at work, subscribe and tell me your story. I spent 8 years building the backbone of Northbridge Logistics, and for most of that time, I believed loyalty meant something. I joined when the company was still scrappy, operating out of 2 floors of a converted warehouse in Chicago's River North. Back then, people looked each other in the eye. Deadlines were brutal, but we carried the weight together, celebrating every client win like it meant we'd secured our future. I remember working late on projects that kept our routing system steady during holiday chaos, sleeping on a couch during an ice storm because deliveries couldn't pause. No one noticed the sacrifice, not really, but I told myself that wasn't why I did it. I did it because I was good at what I did and because I thought I belonged. Everything shifted the moment the private equity firm swept in. The old CEO resigned gracefully with a box of memories and a handshake tour. And in walked Evan Cross, wearing ambition like armor. He was the kind of man who learned your name only if it improved his metrics. Within days, he replaced half of upper management with people who looked like him, spoke like him, and worshiped the same buzzwords: optimization, consolidation, efficiency. It wasn't that he didn't understand the company, it was that he didn't care to. And people like me, long-timers, institutional memory, the ones who carried stability in our heads, became invisible overnight. I wasn't naive. I felt the shift in temperature the moment he toured my department. He barely glanced at the system's display I'd spent months refining. He asked about costs, not outcomes. He asked who else could do my job, not what expertise it required. People in the comments always say they can sense when they're being pushed toward the edge. They're right. It's a physical thing, like the air evaporates a little each day. First came the canceled meetings, then the sudden silence from leadership, then the unfamiliar consultants circling departments with clipboards, never asking questions, just writing. He told us Northbridge needed to evolve, which was corporate speak for trimming people who weren't shiny enough for investor presentations. But even then, even as I saw the storm crawling over the horizon, I didn't imagine he'd aim it directly at me. I was the one they called when a regional hub went down in the middle of the night. I was the one who rebuilt the client flow framework after a disastrous expansion attempt. I knew where the cracks were, the risks, the system's old leadership never documented properly. I wasn't perfect, but I was essential. Or so I thought. The whispers started first. Someone from accounting mentioned Evan had been reviewing high-cost legacy roles. HR accidentally copied me on a calendar hold titled Comp Review Reduction Candidates. My badge access glitched twice in 1 week. Each time, IT brushed it off as a system hiccup. It wasn't. You don't work somewhere as long as I did without learning the scent of danger. And yet, part of me kept working just as hard, as if dedication could outrun someone else's agenda. That's the painful truth people don't admit. We think loyalty will protect us. We think hard work is armor. But when someone new with power needs to prove they're cutting fat, they don't look at contributions. They look at numbers. And in his eyes, mine was a number he wanted gone. I didn't know the exact moment he made that decision, but I felt it tightening around me, subtle as a thread at first, then unmistakable. And by the time the thread turned into a noose, it was already too late to pretend I didn't see it coming. When Evan called me into his office that evening, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't expect the kind of humiliation that stains memory like a bruise. The sky outside had already started dimming, that bruised purple Chicago gets before the streetlights flip on. Most of the team had slipped out early, eager to avoid the tension that had crawled through the building for weeks. I'd planned to leave too, maybe grab takeout and pretend for a night that things weren't unraveling. But then his assistant appeared at my desk, stiff-backed, voice strained. "The CEO would like to see you, now." Those words always sound casual to people who've never heard them in a workplace, but anyone who has knows they come wrapped in dread. His office was too bright when I walked in, the kind of light that makes everything look harsher. He didn't stand, he didn't smile, he didn't even wait for me to sit before launching into it. "Juliet, I'll keep this brief." Not a greeting, an opening blow. He leaned back like he was settling in to watch something unpleasant but necessary, the way someone might observe demolition from a safe distance. "Your position has been evaluated," he continued, fingers steepled like he was posing for an article no one would read. "And unfortunately, your role is no longer essential to the direction Northbridge is taking." I didn't move, I didn't blink, but something inside me pulled taut. "Effective immediately," he added, watching my face like he expected a scene. In that second, I felt two things at once: the sting of betrayal and a strange, icy calm. People always ask, "Did you cry? Did you shake? Did you freeze?" The truth is, I felt nothing. Just an empty space, where shock hadn't fully arrived. Evan kept talking, unaware he'd already revealed everything about who he was. "We appreciate your past contributions," he said, the way someone might thank a cab driver while slamming the door. "But the company has to prioritize efficiency and modernization. Your responsibilities can be handled by external resources moving forward." External resources. Contractors who didn't know our infrastructure. People who'd never worked a crisis night or navigated one of our distribution failures. I almost laughed at the arrogance of it. "Security will escort you out," he added, waving a hand like he was erasing chalk from a board. He had a paper ready, already printed, already signed. My termination letter. He'd planned the whole scene. "HR will send paperwork within the hour," he said. "And Juliet, your access is already disabled." Another lie delivered with confidence. I could always tell when someone didn't understand the systems they claimed to control. A silence settled between us then. He expected pleading, maybe outrage, but I just looked at him. Really looked. At the man who thought power meant deciding who stayed and who didn't. At the man who'd been in the building barely 6 weeks, but believed he understood its heartbeat. At the man who thought he could remove me cleanly, like deleting a row from a spreadsheet. I stood slowly, refusing to give him the spectacle he wanted. He disliked that. I saw it flicker across his expression. Something sour, something small. "Thank you," I said quietly. Not gratitude. A statement, a bookmark, a moment I planned to return to. His smirk told me he thought he'd won. That smirk is why I'll never forget the exact time. 5:12 p.m. The moment he dismissed me from the company I'd held together through storms he would never know existed. Security met me outside his doorway. Marcus, a man who had seen enough turnover to recognize when something was rotten. He didn't meet my eyes at first, but when he finally did, there was apology there. Not pity, respect. The walk through the halls felt longer than it ever had. Not because of the box I carried, but because I saw the empty desks, the shadows of people who had already sensed disaster coming. I wasn't escorted out for performance. I wasn't escorted out for misconduct. I was escorted out because a man who barely knew my name wanted to make an example of someone, and he believed removing me would prove his authority. He had no idea that decision had just opened a door he'd wished stayed shut, because the moment he fired me, something shifted. Not in the company, but in me. The kind of shift that happens right before consequences start to gather. And they were already gathering. He just didn't know it yet. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the glow of the dashboard like it might tell me what to feel. Shame tried to claw its way up my throat, but it didn't stick. Anger simmered, but it didn't boil. Instead, a strange clarity settled in, like every noise around me had been turned down so I could hear my own breath. People always talk about the moment after a firing as a kind of free fall, but for me, it felt like the ground had stopped moving. I finally picked up my phone and called the one person who always saw the angles I missed, Marina Holt. My attorney for 6 years, the woman who negotiated my original employment agreement back when Northbridge desperately needed someone to clean up their collapsing logistical framework. She answered on the second ring. I was waiting on your call, she said, not surprised, not rattled. Tell me what he did. I gave her the bare bones, the timing, the wording, the escort, the claim that my access had already been cut. She didn't react, but I heard papers shifting on her desk. He triggered it, she murmured. Triggered what? There was a pause, like she wanted to choose the most precise version of the truth. Your framework agreement, she said. The proprietary integration terms we fought for. I blinked at the windshield, watching people cross the street toward a restaurant I used to love. Their lives were still moving. Mine had just tilted sideways. Marina, I'm going to need you to explain. She inhaled slowly. You built the original routing and workflow structures before Northbridge hired you. You remember that, right? You were contracting independently. Of course. The system started as my own project. Exactly. And because of that, the company never owned it outright. They only licensed it under a clause tied directly to your active employment. The day that employment ends, another paper rustle, the license dissolves. For a full second, her words didn't compute. Dissolves? Yes, she said. Meaning Northbridge is, as of right now, using your operational methodology without legal permission. My heartbeat didn't even spike. It just thudded once, heavy and slow, like a door closing somewhere behind me. Marina continued. And before you ask, no, Evan clearly did not read your contract. Or if he did, he didn't understand what he was reading. A laugh slipped out, startled and humorless. The man had fired me at 5:12 p.m. with the smug confidence of someone who believed he held every card. He'd never once considered there might be a card he didn't know existed. What happens now? I asked. Now, Marina said, we let them understand what they've done. She instructed me to document every minute, the firing time, the escort, who was present, what was said. She wanted it written, time-stamped, preserved. Do not answer any calls from Northbridge tonight, she added. They will realize the mistake quickly. They will panic. Let them. I sat in silence for a moment, letting the shape of this new reality settle. Not victory, not revenge, just truth shifting into place. Marina, I said quietly, do you think they'll try to fix it? They'll try to crawl, she replied, not fix. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a train rumble across the tracks, the sound rolling through the night like a warning or a promise. I didn't know yet which one applied to me, but something inside me clicked into alignment. Finally, unmistakably. Evan thought he'd removed a piece from his board. He had no idea he'd just knocked over his king. I woke up the next morning before my alarm, instinctively checking my phone the way I had every day for 8 years. Only this time, I wasn't checking for urgent routing failures or overnight escalations. I was checking to see how fast Northbridge would unravel. The first missed call came at 8:07 a.m., Evan. The second at 8:19, HR at 8:25, the new operations director at 8:31. By 9 a.m., my lock screen looked like a disaster timeline. Marina had warned me the panic would come quickly, but I hadn't expected it to sound this frantic. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with the good coffee beans, the ones I only ground on holidays, and watched the steam rise like a signal flare for a war no one realized had started until now. At 9:12, a text came through from someone I'd never spoken to directly. This is Linda Caro, CFO. Please call immediately. She tried again at 9:13 and 9:14. Marina had already texted me earlier. Emergency board meeting at 9 sharp. Do not pick up anything until I call. So I waited. I let myself imagine the boardroom, the 12-foot table no one ever used comfortably, the oversized screens, the cold water glasses dripping condensation onto coasters that cost more than my office chair. I could practically see Evan cruising in with his efficiency slides, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to split open. At 10:03, Marina called. It's happening, she said, sounding almost breathless for the first time in the 10 years I'd known her. You're not going to believe this. She told me Evan started his presentation with the usual jargon-filled nonsense about profitability targets and vendor consolidation. But before he reached his second slide, Linda interrupted him, politely at first, asking whether he'd reviewed my contract before deciding to restructure my role. Evan waved her off, saying something like, "Her work is integrated, the company owns it, standard stuff." I could imagine that dismissive hand gesture. I'd seen it enough times when he passed through my department. Marina continued. That's when legal stepped in. They had your contract on screen. Page 32, Section 9. The proprietary integration clause in bold? She paused. I could hear faint typing in the background, maybe from her other monitor. Juliet, when they explained the automatic revocation that triggers upon termination, the room went silent. In my mind, I saw 12 executives in tailored suits suddenly realizing the blood drain from their faces. Evan asked if there was a workaround. She said. Legal told him no, not without your consent, not without a new licensing agreement. My breath slowed, not satisfaction, not revenge, just the weight of inevitability settling exactly where it belonged. Marina went on. Linda presented an impact analysis. Without your operational methodology, their routing stability drops by 60% within 48 hours. Their peak season projections collapse, and their union contracts, remember those efficiency guarantees you helped negotiate, become liabilities if they can't maintain throughput. I hadn't even considered that. They tried to ask the operations director for a contingency plan. Marina continued. He didn't have one. He didn't even understand your architecture well enough to bluff. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. I'd prepared documentation countless times, but most of it was stored inside my head, the kind of knowledge acquired only by living inside a system, not skimming its surface. Then Marina said the part I knew would come eventually. The board asked Evan why he terminated the one person holding the company's infrastructure together. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The 12-foot table, the glass walls, the betrayal of being questioned by the very people he thought he impressed. He blamed HR, Marina added. Then he blamed analytics. Then he blamed legacy overhead. Did they believe him? Juliet, she said. They voted to suspend him before the meeting even ended. A single exhale left my body, slow, steady, final. Not triumph, just closure. But Marina wasn't finished. They're going to call you again. Harder this time. They're preparing an offer. I stared at my silent phone and felt something shift inside me. Evan had lit the match. Northbridge had stacked the kindling. Now the boardroom was burning and I was nowhere near the flames. I wasn't done yet, but for the first time since 5:12 p.m. the night before, I realized I wasn't the one in danger. They were. The first time my phone rang that afternoon, I let it buzz until it went silent. Northbridge had already tried every number they could find for me, and letting them sit in uncertainty felt like reclaiming something Evan thought he'd taken. But when a new call came through, an unknown number from Denver, I answered. Juliet Moore? The voice was warm, confident. This is Caleb Warren from Strideworks Analytics. I heard you might be between opportunities. I didn't ask how he knew. Word travels fast in industries built on performance and fear, and people like Caleb always had a network listening. I might be, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. What can I do for you? I'll be direct, he said. Your operational framework is legendary. I've seen glimpses of what Northbridge built on top of it, and I've always wondered how much was theirs and how much was yours. For the first time since the firing, I smiled. More than they understood, I said. Much more. He exhaled like that confirmed a suspicion he'd held for years. We're expanding aggressively, he said. Opening 2 new regional hubs by the end of the year. We could use someone with your mind. Or, he paused, we could license your methodology exclusively. The word exclusively settled in my chest like a spark catching flame. Before I could respond, another call buzzed through. Linda, the CFO, again. I ignored it. Caleb continued. I don't want to rush you, but if you're open to talking, I'd like to schedule something today. I think you'll find our compensation philosophies respectful. Respectful, something I hadn't felt at Northbridge in years. Send me your offer parameters, I said. I'm evaluating my options. When we hung up, I finally checked the voicemail Linda had left. Juliet, the board has authorized a significant licensing payment. Please call back. There was no urgency in her voice now. It was desperation wrapped in professionalism. I waited another hour before returning her call. When she answered, she sounded like she hadn't breathed since yesterday. Juliet, thank you. I'm relieved you called. I'm listening, I said. What's the offer? $500,000 for full perpetual rights, she said, effective immediately. I almost laughed, not because the number was small, though it was, but because they believed speed would compensate for arrogance. No, I said simply. She hesitated. We're prepared to negotiate. Are you prepared to remove Evan? Silence. Heavy, telling. Personnel decisions are under review, she said carefully. But yes, that is being considered. For a moment, I stared out my window at the city below. Delivery trucks crawled through intersections, buses hissed against curbs, cyclists cut through traffic. 1,000 moving parts depending on someone knowing what they were doing, someone like me. Northbridge doesn't understand what it's asking for, I said. You're not buying software. You're buying stability, scalability, reliability. That costs more than you're imagining. What number are you thinking? She asked. Before I could answer, a second call buzzed. Caleb again. This time I didn't ignore it. I'll get back to you, I told her. But before I hung up, I added, Linda, whatever Northbridge thinks they can offer, they're already too late. When I switched calls, Caleb said only 5 words. Name your terms, Juliet, anything. That was when I realized the leverage had fully shifted. Northbridge wasn't negotiating from power, they were negotiating from fear, and Strideworks wasn't courting me from need. They were courting me from respect. For the first time since Evan fired me, I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger, not vindication, possibility. I had options, I had power, and I had no intention of giving either away lightly. By the time Strideworks' legal team sent over the preliminary agreement, Northbridge was unraveling faster than I imagined. I'd spent the morning reviewing Caleb's terms. Exclusive rights in their sector, a multi-million-dollar licensing contract plus a senior leadership role. When my phone lit up again with a number I recognized but wished I didn't. Evan. I shouldn't have answered, but curiosity nudged me. His voice came through thin, brittle. Juliet, I need to speak with you, please. He hadn't said please the night he fired me, not once. We're in the middle of something critical, he rushed on. There are concerns about throughput, routing errors, delays, none of which we were experiencing before. I think there may have been miscommunication. Miscommunication. That was what he called firing me without cause and without reading his own legal vulnerabilities. Evan, I said, what do you want? A shaky breath. I want to fix this. I could hear movement behind him, voices, the faint echo of a conference room. He wasn't calling from privacy, he was calling from panic. Before I could reply, another voice whispered near his phone. Tell her the offer. He swallowed. Juliet, the board has authorized a new licensing proposal. $2 million, immediate transfer. $2 million, 10 times their first offer, and still not enough. Not because of the number, but because of the arrogance that preceded it. I already have an agreement on my desk, I said. Silence, a kind of silence that vibrates. Strideworks, he whispered. The way he said it made it clear the board had already discussed the possibility behind closed doors. Juliet, listen to me. If you go through with this, if you give them your framework, Northbridge can't compete, you know that. Our entire model— Your model, I corrected. You fired me, remember? He didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the words lodged somewhere he hadn't expected to feel pain. Please, he tried again, voice breaking in a way I didn't think men like him allowed themselves. People will lose jobs. People always lose jobs when leaders make stupid decisions, I said. You just thought you were immune to consequences. I ended the call before he could scramble for another excuse. Minutes later, Marina called, breathless. It's happening, she said. Evan's presenting to investors right now, an emergency call. Someone leaked the operational instability. I hadn't leaked anything. I didn't need to. Northbridge had been burning from the inside long before I struck my first match. Juliet, she continued, midway. Through his briefing, the board cut him off. Publicly, removed him in real time. The interim CEO announced a leadership transition to restore operational confidence. Investors lit the chat on fire. I closed my eyes, not in triumph, but in a deep exhale that felt like releasing 8 years of being overlooked. Evan hadn't fallen because of me. He fell because he underestimated what he didn't understand. People say revenge is sweet. For me, it wasn't sweet. It was clean, necessary, a correction. Later that afternoon, I signed Strideworks' final contract. Caleb called immediately after his legal team confirmed receipt. "Welcome to the future," he said. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Northbridge tried calling 3 more times that night. I blocked every number. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. And I didn't want to negotiate with people who only saw my value once it threatened to walk out the door. They made their choice at 5:12 p.m. on a Thursday evening. Everything that followed was simply the bill coming due. In the weeks that followed, I didn't think much about Northbridge. Not because I'd forgiven anything, but because my life finally felt like it belonged to me again. Strideworks pulled me into meetings where my experience mattered, where decisions weren't made to impress investors, but to build something that would last. The first time their engineering team asked me to walk them through my vision, not my output, not my deliverables, but my vision, I felt something settle inside me that I hadn't realized was missing. Respect doesn't feel like flattery, it feels like alignment. And with every day that passed, I understood more clearly that Evan hadn't taken anything from me. He'd freed me. Northbridge continued spiraling for months. Articles popped up about distribution failures, missed deadlines, unhappy clients. Industry chatter said they'd spent millions trying to reverse engineer the framework they once accessed freely. But I didn't need headlines to validate anything. My validation came from waking up without dread, from building alongside people who valued clarity and competence, from knowing I'd stepped into a future that wasn't built on someone else's insecurities. People often ask me what the lesson is, what they should take from what happened. I tell them this: when someone in power underestimates you, don't waste your breath proving them wrong. Let their choices reveal their limits. Let your path reveal yours. And if you've ever walked out of a building feeling discarded or replaced, trust me, there might be a door waiting to open that leads somewhere you were meant to build all along. I didn't fully understand the weight of those 8 years until the moment I walked out of that building with a cardboard box. It wasn't just a job I lost that evening, it was time I'd traded, trust I'd given freely, and pieces of myself. I'd handed over believing they were safe in the company's hands. And realizing how casually Evan tossed all of it aside forced me into a truth I'd been avoiding. Leadership wasn't the problem. The culture that allowed someone like him to rise was. That's the part that still settles heavy in my chest. Not the firing, not even the humiliation, but the fact that an entire system looked at someone who barely understood the work and called him visionary, while the people carrying the weight were treated as replaceable. That kind of arrogance doesn't appear overnight. It grows in hallways where silence is rewarded, in boardrooms where metrics matter more than memory, and in corners of the company where real labor is invisible because it isn't flashy. As painful as it was, I needed to see the truth without the polish. And once I saw it, I understood something important. The collapse wasn't my fault. It was the culture's. If there's anything I want someone my age to hear, it's this. Don't blame yourself for a system that was broken long before you arrived. And don't let someone else's ignorance convince you your work had no value. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your self-respect is to step away from the people who never deserved your loyalty in the first place. How to get started today. Notice where leadership talks over expertise instead of learning from it. Keep a private record of decisions and patterns. They reveal more than people admit. Ask yourself who actually benefits from your silence. Stop excusing behavior that drains your confidence. Stay open to places that value what you carry. What part of this experience feels closest to something you've lived through?